Welcome everybody to the first session of PMF Connect. My name is Julia. My colleague Grace will be the one presenting this evening.
Thanks, Julia. Thank you everybody for joining us for our first PMF Connect session. To give you a little bit of context about these sessions, we heard feedback from the PMF attendees that they wanted ways to keep up with the conversations that took place at the event. And they really also enjoyed the direct contact they had with their speakers and the other people who could help answer questions or even just to bounce ideas off of. So we thought we could help facilitate this with these PMF Connect sessions. On about a monthly basis, we'll have a guest host speak briefly on a particular topic. Today's will be on product management in traditional companies. And the majority of the time will be more of an AMA, Ask Me Anything type of session, where our guest host will take questions from you all. But at the very beginning, they'll share briefly a few minutes about that particular topic. And you can send in questions via the chat window that is most likely on your right-hand side of the screen. For those of you who are in the Hangouts window, you can feel free to ask questions also directly, or also submit the questions via the chat window as well. So with that, I'd like to introduce our host for today. Patricia Morizio is a senior product manager at Verizon and spoke at PMF 17 last month with her session, Magic in the Mayhem, Scaling Digital Product Management at a 132-year-old Company. She is based in New York City and has experience in conceptualizing, designing, and implementing strategic digital products for startups. She has a background in economic development and a master's degree from London School of Economics. And so with that, I'll turn it over to you, Tricia.
Thanks, Grace. Thanks, Julia. I'm really excited to be here. Hello, everyone. Like Grace said, I spoke at Product Management Festival last month, and it was an amazing experience. I met so many interesting people, learned so many new things. And what I talked about there was really related to strategies to approach digital innovation and create a product culture at a legacy enterprise. And so today I'll continue that conversation, but framing it more in terms of the core tensions and opportunities I see related to product management in traditional companies. So I have some notes. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. So the first theme I'll touch on is the tension between innovation and execution. Organizations obviously need both to succeed, because innovation is telling you to fail fast, while execution says that failure is not an option. And so most established companies struggle with innovation activities because they're built around the execution of the current successful business model and on perfection and protection of the status quo. But getting better at things people want less will not help them to survive. So a common practice is for large enterprises to form innovation groups insulated from day-to-day business, where they can explore and experiment more future state ideas. While this definitely has its merits, in practice, if you separate your innovation and execution functions too much, you get this schism between teams. And not just in terms of practical applications of strategy, but in the work culture, where it becomes a very stark us versus them view. And there's frustration on both sides, where the quote unquote doers feel that their work is outdated and soon to be retired for the next shiny thing, and innovators deal with the view by other teams that they're working on fluffy moonshot ideas, or worse yet, not working at all. So at the end of the day, true innovation is driven by an obsessive focus on customer needs, technological developments, and firm capabilities within a culture that allows the team to pursue those key elements. So similar to the struggle I've seen between innovation and execution in the enterprise is the decoupling of digital channels from the core product. And what I mean by this is that you see this with companies like Verizon, where the product itself, like our wireless business or our broadband internet or TV division where I work, has been around longer than the digital channels to support them. And these channels include the websites or mobile apps that really were meant to complement the core service. But as digital became a core component of the modern experience, they started to become tightly integrated integrated, at least in customers' minds. In other words, the digital experience is part and parcel to the total customer experience. They're not separate. Organizational structures are not as quick to keep pace. So the teams that manage the physical product, like the network or the TV, are, depending on the company, distinct from those managing digital. Siloed nature of large organizations, they're probably not working together as tightly as they should. For example, as much as our digital group tries to foster a startup mentality within Verizon, for example, it means very little if we don't influence the core product strategy and both worlds remain disconnected. So we sometimes refer to this as digital blinders informally. So we just need to be conscious of that and work together to solve at the organizational level. Something I brought up at my PMF talk was the opportunity to make impact at scale at a large company with an existing reputation and extensive customer base. Even small enhancements can easily touch thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of users instantaneously. But with great power comes great responsibility. So in systems thinking, we're taught to look at implications of our work beyond the immediate output. But this gets lost in the rapid pace of software development. When teams are heads down focused on the next release, they can lose sight of second and third order impacts that can have really serious consequences, especially at scale. Just look at what happened with the heat Facebook and others have gotten recently for surfacing quote unquote fake news. Another seeming benefit from scale that actually hinders progress is the curse of resources. So too much money that large companies tend to have thrown blindly without thought or rigor ends up in bloated projects, wasted efforts, and more tangibly slower development due to increased coordination costs and really just a higher likelihood of misalignment. As they say, 9 women can't make a baby in 1 month. So understanding the value of being truly lean and operating by those principles is key. And the last core element, important for teams of all sizes, but especially crucial for traditional companies trying to stay relevant, is this relationship between vision and autonomy. Management writer Daniel Pink outlined 3 elements of motivation: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And I thought this was really powerful because people basically want to have the skills, freedom, and direction to achieve a goal. They want to have impact, and when very entrepreneurial people join large companies, they think they're going to have this impact. But they often get frustrated because either progress is too slow because traditional management methods used for legacy businesses don't really apply as much when working with innovation, or the team may be super nimble, but it's operating on an island in its own little bubble, separated from the core business. And in this case, the team lacks a clear vision for how their work ladders into the overarching company mission. And in a corporate environment that values perfect execution over free exploration, every innovation activity becomes difficult. But on the flip side, you can't do decentralized decision-making if people don't have a common understanding of where they're going. If you don't have a vision, you wind up running around in circles, which in between vision and autonomy is so critical. So those are just some of my thoughts on the topic. I'm curious to know what you guys think, if this resonates with you, yeah.
Thank you, Tricia. That was really helpful. We'll go ahead and take a look at the chat windows as well for you. Please, those of you who are watching us, listening to us, please feel free to utilize the chat windows to ask any questions that you would like for Tricia on the topic or how it is for her in terms of her presentation that she had regarding Verizon and scaling digital products in traditional companies. Please feel free to ask any questions that you would like. In the meantime, I'll start us off with a couple that I've gotten from some folks. I apologize. Okay, here we go. So one of the things, and Tricia, I think you had also mentioned a little bit about when people have come in perhaps from other environments, but you know, how can people help create or affect change at a company that is large or has a legacy culture, and perhaps some things are still entrenched with the status quo? So I think it would be just really helpful to know maybe either some of your experiences and then perhaps even a couple tips on some people where people are really looking to make some change, but they just are really hitting against a lot of legacy, perhaps is a way to look at it.
Sure, yeah. So just to give you guys some background, this was really my first time working at a large company. I've been at Verizon for 2 years, but before that I worked at several startups and smaller companies where I was studying. Like I never was really used to this like big corporate mindset and how people work. So I really just dove into the deep end. I really just wanted to experience what it was like, and I got that. So it's really interesting because I don't think there's any like one size fits all model for how to do this. And I've actually read a lot of articles recently about the topic, and some people are saying, you know, stop focusing on the teams can't do it. It needs to be solved at the organizational level. And then there's counter arguments that, you know, it needs to start with the teams. And obviously I think it's a little bit of both. You really need to have both the top-down support to really create an environment where more modern, agile, innovative, whatever you want to call it, where that type of atmosphere is allowed, but also more so than allowed, it's encouraged. But you also need bottom-up, you know, troops on the ground who want that change, because just saying something from an executive won't really give the people who are doing the work the motivation to want to achieve it. And on the flip side, a lot of times you have a lot of motivated folks on the bottom, so to speak, but if at some point they hit these roadblocks in the process, in the organization, that are not super tangible, because no one will overtly oppose agile or innovation. No one wants to say that. But you'll get these roadblocks, whether it's you know, some legal is telling you can't do something, or some other organization is afraid they're going to be sunset, so they're blocking you in a different way. You kind of need, that's where you need the executive support to succeed. And what I found was I was just tired of waiting. I didn't really want to wait for anyone to create the organization that I wanted to work in. So I basically just started doing things differently. I found coworkers that were like me, that were frustrated maybe with the way things were, or the way people and teams operated or interacted with each other. And once you kind of find a group, it helps if you guys are on the same team because you're working on the same product. But once you find those minded individuals, you can say, let's do this differently. Let's stop doing 2-month-long sprints. Let's start involving design and engineering in the conversation from the get-go. Let's stop doing everything so linearly. And so by just trying things, you'll often see that you get some successes, and then you kind of have to parade your successes and say, hey, we switched this working model, we reduced the working team by half, or we involved design and dev from the very beginning, and look, we were able to release faster, or we were able to incorporate customer feedback more regularly, or, you know, executives love numbers, so you can show how many more active users you have or how much revenue you're getting. Like, tell the people who can make the difference what they care about, and show that how the work that you're doing differently contributed to that achievement. And so then you'll start to find that these executives, or whoever's in charge of creating this environment where Agile is encouraged, they'll start telling other teams like, hey, try what that team did, or we saw good results, why don't you guys do it? And then other people will either want to do it themselves, or they'll be kind of, you know, encouraged to do it by their leadership. And the thought is that by kind of having an army of different teams that are kind of learning the same things you're learning and seeing some of the same benefits, it'll become scalable, and you'll start to do things without having to have this mandate. So I find that just doing it and just going for it, trying something, that's really what's important. And then if you find that you can't find like-minded people, or your executives don't care, or they really are not impressed with what you're doing, I mean, maybe that's a sign that they really are not willing to innovate, and then it's probably time to move on. But I think you'll find more often than not, people want to get better. That's always a problem.
We have a couple of questions. Simon asks us if there's a good example of something which went well, and what's more difficult to do: build a successful startup or build a successful team startup within a big company, and what did you like better doing? So is it more difficult to build a successful startup or build a successful team startup within a big company?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think that some challenges are similar, but you know, they're unique in their own ways. I think at a startup, you know, you don't have the you don't have the benefit of perhaps having a big name, or like if you're trying to sell or market to people, people might not have never heard of your company. So you need to invest a lot in building that brand and understanding what resonates with people. Like, Verizon is not the most well-loved company in the world. I won't be the first. I'll be the first to admit that. So you get a benefit of people knowing what the company is. A lot of decisions that might not necessarily be your own decisions, and part of working for a large organization is understanding and believing in the company and being willing to defend them or speak on their behalf. Whereas a startup, you don't have to do that, but then also people don't know what your company is. So it's a catch-22 where I think it's different challenges at different stages. I mean, I'm probably biased, but I think that building an innovation culture at a larger company is more challenging than scaling a startup, because if you have a good idea, if you're starting to achieve product market fit, if you have a good team that believes in the same things and you guys are all working towards the same vision, especially if it's a smaller team, I find it's really much easier to grow because you're doing the right thing, everyone's aligned, and you don't have too many people that are weighing you down. At a big company, again, you need to understand how your team's mission ladders into the overarching company vision. It could be, very different what you're working on and then what the company's saying. So like aligning that and making sure people are motivated and they're all marching towards the same drum, that's really important. But it is really difficult to move people's mindsets that have been the same forever. And when you have a business that's still successful, it's really easy to say, well, why don't we just keep doing it the way we are? We've had this much success so far. So it's hard to change mentality. So that's why I would say I think it's more challenging to do that, but it's important to me because if we're able to make some progress.
So you like a challenge.
Yeah, I know. I'm probably crazy. Talk to me in a year. If I'm not at the mental institution, hopefully I will have made some success.
James is asking you, how do you view the need for central planning and coordination versus bottom-up innovation? This refers to large organizations.
Yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at right now, is that we've had a lot of bottom-up, like motivation and mentality, kind of getting the groups on the ground, working in the right ways, interacting. But sometimes I'm begging my leadership to kind of align with different teams, because it's like you'll have your own set of missions, but then a different department, a different part of the company that you have to interact with on a project, they'll have something completely different, and you actually sometimes receive conflicting direction. So I think once you've kind of gotten that motivation, like I said before, that top-down, not just support, but coordination amongst the teams, and really understanding, like I just said, how your work ladders into the greater vision of the department, the overall mission of the company. Like tying those links together is super important, because it's really easy for groups to work off in silos, get different directions, but without kind of that core planning from a overarching business perspective, you're running around in circles, kind of redoing work that other teams are doing, or actually actively conflicting work that different teams are doing. And so that is really frustrating. So it's really important. I don't think we've solved it yet, at least in my opinion, and how to do it the right way, because like I touched on before, a lot of the organizational structures and processes that have gotten big companies to where they are today, they can be outdated, especially when you're trying to do things in a more agile, innovative, fail-fast way. The organizational processes don't always match, so we have to evolve them to be able to work in this new age. And I don't know if anyone's figured it out quite right yet, but I think that's what we're all moving towards.
Vikash asks us if does scaling agile helps usually, or I think you've mentioned it does, but
yeah, I think also it has to be done the right way. I think there's a difference in when you say scaling agile to mean getting a bunch of agile consultants in and telling people what Scrum is or how to write a user story. Like that stuff's important. hope a lot of people who are on digital teams kind of have that underlying understanding, but it is important for people who may have not worked in those environments. But I don't think that just you need to do it the right way. You need to do it from a cultural perspective, not just education. This is what we're going to do. This is the new process. We're going to release 7-day sprints. Like, this is what we're going to do. They have to understand why you're changing, what the goals of the process change are. They have to believe in those goals and understand. So I don't think agile in itself is a silver bullet to solve these things. It is a way to get to the end goal. But again, I think making sure everyone has the end goal and they want to work in a different way is probably more important than just teaching people about agile, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Would you recommend dedicating X% of effort per sprint for the current product development to innovation to keep motivation up, as opposed to having separate teams set up for innovation? So like the team should have a certain amount of time and effort per sprint dedicated to innovation, or should there be a separated team for innovation?
Yeah, I think so. There are differing opinions on this. I think mine is that by really separating the innovation function too much, it creates this bad culture, and you have these people who are working on the next new wave thing, and they can't tell you all the details because it's top secret and it's so important. And just if you're not working on that thing, how can you not feel that you are not doing something valuable, or maybe your job is going to be lost, or something bad's going to happen. It's this, and I think that's where a lot of the divide comes. And I said before, like, it's this us versus them thing. So I think that each team should be responsible for pursuing kind of what's new in their field, or if they're working on mobile, what's the latest mobile trends, or the new developments with OS, or whatever it is. I don't know if, I guess it would depend how the team operates. I don't know if you have to dedicate a certain amount of time, or as a manager, you create the environment where they're encouraged to do that and also get their work done.
What about how do you do it in your team? Is there like a 1 day a month or 1 day a quarter, or like how does it actually work in real life?
Well, for us, we don't schedule it as kind of a time period. So basically, first we had to really, and I think we're still moving, we have to, and not just my team, but all teams, we have to move away from like this command and control structure. Like, just because your manager said to do this doesn't mean this is how you think critically. Like, are we asking the right questions? Like, teaching people to more independently is kind of a cultural shift that we're trying to encourage others to do. And so for my team, that's why we involve dev team design early on in the process. We talk about these things often. So something that we've done recently, it's not really part of every week, but we have a design sprint month or once every other month, which is a new thing for our teams. They never did one. We call them vision sprints, depending on what the purpose of it is. We get the devs, the designers, the different product subject matter experts into a room, and we do a sprint and a design sprint. And it's really interesting because the development team, at least, they can think beyond just code and what they're supposed to deliver. They're actually contributing to where we should go in terms of the product vision and where we're trying to advance, and they can bring in some of that knowledge that they have from the field into those discussions. So we try to do that pretty regularly. We also encourage them to go to meetups, start meetups, go to conferences. So we have budget for that, and so people can create those kind of things. And when we do, we actually have this, our Irving office in Texas is where a lot of our development team sits. They have iOS meetup every month or every other month, and that's really awesome. And so then we show other teams in our organization, look what they're doing, like, you should participate, you should do something else. So it's more about rallying people behind these ideas and involving them in these design processes that they normally wouldn't have been involved in, rather than allocating like 5% of their time to innovation work. If that makes sense.
Cool. Do you feel it's enough? I mean, maybe some people are naturally innovators or explorers, or maybe they like to get more involved. Do you feel like there? And sometimes the best idea might come from the silent person who sits in a corner. Do you think is it enough, or do you have additional tips or best practices which can like really encourage innovation?
Yeah, I will admit that, it's really hard when you have deadlines and people and leaders kind of breathing on your neck and saying, "Where's this release and when is this feature going to be delivered?" To just constantly maintain this idyllic culture. Like, we're innovators and we do features sometimes and we release work sometimes, but we're always thinking like it's hard to create this utopia, I guess, of how we would like it to be, and dealing with very real product pressures and having to deliver. So I think that just kind of constantly reminding yourself, like, how much work did the team do this week that wasn't from an executive request or wasn't from like a product request or something like that? How much work did we do? Using retrospectives and using the time where you guys reflect on your past sprints to ask those questions, it surfaces them up, because you'll say, hey, we did just a lot of bug triage this week, or we did a lot of X, Y, and Z, but we really weren't thinking about advancements in the field or what we could be doing differently or thinking outside of the box for this next feature. I think using that time in retrospectives, if you're having them, if not, you should be, to ask those questions in an open environment, it's probably helpful. But yeah, I think it's hard. We're not perfect. Like, it's not like we're just like innovating all the time. But also when you see those groups, at least for me, when I see those groups that are doing more innovation work or like next phase stuff, I encourage my team to reach out to them. So if it's a dev team that I've talked to, I introduce my dev team to them, or sometimes they're sitting in the same office. So we say, go talk to them. And then you see, just by like connecting physically, like as humans, just talking about things, they feel involved and they kind of riff off of each other and say, hey, what about this? Or this is how it can integrate into my product. So really just, it's really easy to live in your silos, be on phone calls all day, not really interact face-to-face with a lot of teams that aren't in your area. So encouraging that face-to-face contact, making budget for meetings for the teams to be together if they're not together all the time. That's where a lot of these ideas come from, and water cooler talk, for lack of a better term. So just making sure that you're creating those environments where that's possible, I think, is important.
So buy a water cooler. That's the best thing one
That
can
sounds
do.
really old school. I don't think we have a water cooler anymore, but the term still applies.
Vikash has a problem with his traditional dev team, who doesn't really want to change their way of doing work. So they, as far as I understand, they don't want to move to being agile.
Yeah, I feel yeah. I work with some teams like that as well. Again, I found that when I'm like physically with the team, I get along with them a lot better. I understand where they're coming from. So for me, I found that people who are resisting, it comes down to a couple of things. That they might have just been doing this for a long time, so they're used to the way they're working, and learning a new skill is challenging. It takes time. So maybe that's where some of their pushback is coming from. So I think understanding maybe where they want to go in their career, like if they just want to stay and do the same thing until they die, essentially, like it's probably not much you can change. So at the working level, just understand what their motivations are, what their fears are. They could be masking it as in terms of, maybe they are afraid of losing their job or being replaced by technology. So they resist in a way where they're resisting change, but there's another reason behind it. So I think it gets more complex. So really unpacking why people are resisting and understanding what their problem is, that'll help you kind of offer, solutions or ways to work together. And then on the flip side, understanding who their leadership is, who's the director, who's the VP of engineering, like, do they have a vision? I'm sure some of their metrics might be tied to innovation or, for lack of a better word, but like doing more forward-thinking things. What are their goals? What kind of teams do they want to create? So if you can establish a relationship with those people and understand where they're coming from, they're the best people to motivate their teams and get them to do what you want them to do. The people in charge might be helpful in terms of not just understanding where they're coming from when they resist, but also in rallying the troops to maybe try something new, even if it's just a tweak to the process change and then seeing what happens. Like, but that's kind of what I found, because I definitely had similar issues as well.
There's a question from Zach, who's wondering, when you release something new, what's your bar for good enough? How do you manage perfect and avoid potential negative customer experience versus getting something out as fast as possible to start learning? So where's the right balance? What's good enough?
Yeah, that's a good question too. I'm a firm believer that you should strive for perfection, but like, don't let that hold you back either. I think it is situational. So we're going through a release right now where I'm not comfortable releasing something, but my bar is basically like, will this make the customer experience better overall? So if they're comparing the old state versus the new state versus some of the potential issues that we're shipping with versus, just weighing it and just having to kind of go with your gut instinct on that, I think is important. For me, it's basically like, would I be annoyed if this product was released, or would I actually receive value from it? And so I think my bar is me as a user. Would I be delighted, or would I be happy to see this feature? So that's why it's a little bit subjective. So I couldn't really, but it is important. And after we release, I've invested a lot in my team, not just in terms of technical skills, but bringing people on who really understand the customer. So we have a lot of call centers, people interacting with people on the phone all the time. Again, we're trying to move people to digital, but a habit of users is to call in when they have an issue because it's complex or the pricing may be complex. So we're bringing people in from the centers who really understand the customers. They talk to them daily, and having them influence our product process and giving their opinion on what users will respond well with, what they won't. And that's really important, and making sure you have the right team members who can be that voice for the user is super important. And we make an effort at least to respond to any feedback that we get in app stores or in internal feedback. We read it every day. We take it to heart. And sometimes we don't get it right. Sometimes we release something that, we didn't catch something, or it didn't really resonate the way we wanted. And that's just life.
Do you have any like horror story you can share with us, or?
Okay, so this is, I don't know if this is a horror story, but sometimes we get caught up a little bit too much in design. Like, we want things to look nice, and we have a great designer, and she's part of our core team, and we've built a great app because of her. But I think sometimes I lose sight of things in terms of the design. So we had a referral link in our app, so you can refer other customers to BIOS and you get some rewards points. And we were doing really great, and the business was saying, my files are doing great, and they're referring X amount of users to rah. So we're like, you know what, we can make it better. So we looked at it and we're like, this page is too simple. We're gonna make it beautiful. So we made it beautiful, and lo and behold, people stopped referring other people because it was being paid. So that was definitely something where I don't think we really took the customer feedback into account as much, or we were taking different customer feedback. Maybe those who complained that our page was ugly. Like, we maybe shouldn't have paid attention so much to that versus looking at the results of people actually using the feature. So we had to revise the page, and we kind of
turn it back to ugly.
I mean, we revised it a little bit, but yeah, we had to put our tails between our legs and just acknowledge that we got too caught up in the success and really lost sight of the customer a bit. So I think things like that, now we're really cautious about. We're like, all right, maybe we'll test this out in a smaller group, or if we're redesigning something, what's the purpose? Like, what's the problem we're trying to solve versus just making it prettier? So that's a lesson we learned.
Do you have like a fan group which helps you beta test, or how do you usually do it feature release? Or
so it depends. Sometimes we usually start with internal employees first, so we'll send out, we have a lot of employees, so that's helpful. We'll send them out kind of a call to give feedback. It varies. Sometimes we don't get as much feedback as we want. Testing groups in different locations, and basically they're awesome because they do a lot of the legwork for us. They find the participants. If there's a monetary incentive to do the test, they'll bring them in. That's more for like qualitative feedback, where we're like sitting down one-on-one with customers. And we can say we want customers who have never used the app, or we want customers who use the app every day. So they're really good at getting us those people. When we want a little bit more quantity, we use usertesting.com to get more. It's a little bit more scalable, cheaper to do than the one-on-one testing in the lab. And then yeah, we sometimes release, you know, A/B test, or we'll release smaller portions of features and see how they're doing. If they're moving the needle, roll it back. If not. So we're trying to get to a structure where we can do that more often versus just release totally to everyone all at once. But many processes are slow. Getting the right tools in place has been a bit of a challenge, but we're all trying to work that way. So we have different ways to test depending on what we're trying to test. So
Vikash has another question. What is the best way? Praise a team or a member who has done major work in the release? Agile says it's always a team success or a team fail, but other team members get offended if they're not praised. So, like, should you praise the individual success, or should you just look at the whole team?
Yeah, I think obviously you want to give the credit to the team. I mean, when we announce successes, like to the wider organization in a meeting, in an email, whatever, I will call out individuals who had particular investment in whatever we're announcing. So sometimes, you know, one developer, a couple developers will be really heavy in one feature that is being announced, and they deserve credit, I think, as does the whole team. But I think it's good to single people out who worked on it. It's just really important that you remember to think of everybody, because there could be team members that are focusing on maintenance or bugs, and that stuff keeps your app running. Like without that, it would fall apart. But you might forget that they're the backbone because they're not working on the next shiny feature or whatever. So just remembering to, at times, give credit where credit is due to everyone, even if they're not working on a lot of front-end stuff, is important. But I definitely believe in praising individuals when they deserve it.
Could you share with us a little bit more about your team? You mentioned a core team, and also I think a designer, but I think it'd just be very helpful for a frame of reference to know who's on your team.
Sure. So I'm the main product manager on the MyFios app. For any Fios customers out there, I don't know, probably not many if you're in Europe, but so there's me. Then I have 4 team members on my main team. So we have Danielle, and she is based in Irving. She has an iOS background, so she sits with our developers. She's really that linkage between our development group. She can prototype things really easily, really quick and dirty. If we want to not necessarily bother the dev team with coming up with a proof of concept or something, she's really nimble and technically capable of doing stuff like that. She's also super personable, so she's a good person to be that liaison between the dev team when sometimes you have miscommunication or things might not be aligned. She's key. Then I have Andrew and Matt. They are based in New York, and they really help us get the right tools into the app. So like I said, we are a little slow to the game because we're a big company, but we're trying to get the right analytics, the right attribution, the right marketing automation, all the right tools that all mobile apps, all successful mobile apps have. It takes a long time. You have to go through extensive legal and security reviews. You have to negotiate contracts. You have to tag the apps. Like, there's a lot of work that goes into it. So their expertise in managing those relationships and getting us set up for success, they have strong analytics background, so that really helps. Core member of my team is Celia. She is who I referred to before. She came from one of the call centers. She worked there for several years, so she has a really deep understanding of the customer, and she talks to them every day. She understands the product like the back of her hand. She doesn't get lost in a lot of the things that we're working on. She's focused on customer value and making sure their voice is heard, not just in terms of she does as kind of like a support function, but also getting their voice back into the product development is super important. So I think we have a really great mix of analytics expertise, customer feedback, and technical as part of the core business team, which I think is what makes us successful. So that's been really helpful. And then is our main designer. She does not report to me, but we work daily on building out the app. And then Andy and Mazen, they're on our IT teams, and they're all going to kill me for saying their names, but again, you should give credit where credit is due. So we work really closely in talking about upcoming requests or new developments, and then we kind of divide and conquer. So then Julia will be responsible for managing whatever design, and development will be responsible for really how we're delivering things. And I think the most important thing is that we work so closely, even if we're not physically together. We just have that relationship where we're all a team. And if someone adds us to a request or an email, like where it makes sense, we include the others. We want to be all on the same page and understanding what's coming in while keeping everyone, not distracted, but really focused on what they're supposed to be doing.
That sounds great. That's really amazing. Another question I had was actually also around your organization, but I think it was more around the champion. And I think you had alluded to it a little bit in the beginning too. Who is your champion? You don't have to mention names, but I'd just like to know, and especially maybe from the context of people on our call today, how did you go about getting a champion, or was it more proactive, and how does that relationship work? Because I think it's really critical to have someone there that is supporting you.
Yeah, for sure. So I think the way that we did it, or just the way it happened, is our VP, basically, he started hiring a bunch of people. He's responsible for digital for FiOS, and he started hiring a bunch of people who had come from smaller companies, who were newer, who just might have been more attuned to this mindset of just working differently, agilely, again, however you want to term it. His main goal was just to hire a bunch of people. So it made it really easy for me to find like-minded individuals at my level or around my level, because they were there, but they weren't not coordinated. So we had to figure out as a team, say, okay, we'll try this. It was very, again, like I said, I mentioned autonomy before, that we were very autonomous. Like our strategy seemed to just be like, hire a bunch of smart people, they'll figure out what to do. We started to figure out what to do, and then we kind of got into some, roadblocks with, X, Y, and Z process or whatnot. And then, periodically we'll go to him, or we'll say, I'm having this issue. What do you think? Or can you talk to so-and-so? So the model that we have was just like, get a lot of good people around. When you have an issue, hopefully he can fix the issue. If not, switch to a different issue. And so that's kind of how it was. So it was top down in the sense that vision to create a team of people like this, also balancing it with our really core team members who have been around 20, 30 years. His vision was to mesh the old with the new, or experienced with the kind of people from a different mindset, and they would create something magical, and they'd figure out how to do it. So that's where, like I mentioned before, vision really comes into effect, because you can have all this autonomy, but then you can kind of spin around in circles. So making sure that we're all aligned, and we come together every once in a while and say, okay, we're all still working towards this thing. We're all having this issue. Can you please help us? Like, just going back to him that way helps how we work. If I explained that well.
It's great. Thank you.
Cool. We have another question. Condora, one semester hint. How can she get her, I assume it's her, old school manager to understand that things are complex and take time? So how do you tackle such a situation?
Yeah, I'm really lucky because I have a great manager. She's very practical. She understands like the world we work in, but she's also very forward-looking. Had someone who maybe was impatient, or they didn't understand the intricacies of your environment and what's going on. I think what helps me in terms, or it helps us, our whole group, in terms of telling our story, is just showing the complexity of the business, like putting it on paper. We've actually like listed out all the systems just for like our billing section, for example, that have to interact, and mapping it out. And we're like, guys, this is what we're dealing with, and this is just one piece of the puzzle. If you wanted, you could map out the whole organization. Like, you'll quickly see when you put it on paper or in words or in visuals, like whatever, just somehow communicating the complexity, people start to get it, and then they realize, okay, this is why you're not doing weekly releases, or this is why this took so long to. I found too, what's really helpful in terms of telling my story. For example, like, I'm trying to get new tools into the app so we can be a better app. A battle that I face is some IT teams, they want to build everything internally. So you'll see that a lot too with big companies. So I literally had to put on paper how long it takes me to deliver a push message, or how long it takes me to deliver a marketing message. And I use specific examples. I'm like, remember this one campaign, these dates, these people, this is how long it took. And really just like shoving that in someone's face and giving them real tactical examples is super powerful. I think it won't be overnight success, but people start to get it, and they start to understand you more and where you're coming from. I do not know how to explain it more clearly than that. So there may be other ways, but that's how I found kind of to be somewhat successful in terms of getting a little bit better.
And I think ultimately quit your job and find a manager.
That's a good point. Yeah, if you're like really hitting a brick wall, and I think I mentioned this before, like there's only so much you can do. If you see a glimmer of hope and you're starting to make traction, that's different than like you're just not getting anywhere. And I think that's again, probably a subjective call, but that's a very good point.
I think like it's your duty to try out things, but at the end, Condora, if you're just wasting your potential, think about what amazing things you can do in the right setting with the right manager, because there are great teams. Like Trisha has one, so it is possible. There are great teams out there. So it's not your duty to transform an old school guy into thinking modernly. Cool. Grace, any other question from your side?
I think there's one more from over here, and this one is and I actually wonder, because you might be in a section that is a little bit, a subsection is a little different. So the original question is, you're in industry, telecom, that I think you also had mentioned it's not considered necessarily the sexiest one out there. And so this would be probably more of a, how did you get into this industry, and probably more importantly, any advice for people who are in similar situations, and for them to get excited?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think I'm lucky because I work in a smaller part of the company that we are focused on digital. But like when you go to different organizations, you're like, wow, what do they do? Or like, this is so complicated, or it's like so dry in some senses. So I think my main goal, again, was just like, I want to work for a big company, so let's see how it is. I didn't really think too much about the industry, but it is really old. Like, you deal with, like, I see documents from the 80s, and I'm just like, why are we still referring to these things? And it's just like it's so crazy. Or it's funny, actually, in my office even, I'll see like posters from like the 70s or 60s, and I'm like, oh, that's actually like a relic. I think I have one here too. I keep them because they're like, wow, this is vintage, but it's like kind of scary if you're like, people are actually still reading these things. But I think it depends where you work. Like, I think the good thing, at least about Verizon, is if I get bored or I want to work on something new, there are different groups doing interesting things in terms of, maybe more, forward thinking. Like if you're interested in connected home or telematics or IoT and other fields that telecom is still part of, but might not be like, hooking up wires to homes. Like, I think there are opportunities in the industry to really work on cutting edge stuff that at least I find interesting. If your organization doesn't allow you to do that, or doesn't allow that forward mobility, or having you like really progress as an individual and as a person, then it's probably not the right organization for you. For me, I feel like if I wanted to move or try something new, my leadership would support me. Like they want the best for me. They obviously, hopefully, would be sad. Again, I think it goes back to the last question. If your leadership doesn't want to encourage you to do those things that you find interesting, then you probably should go on. But if you're not motivated, I don't think you can just like grow motivation for your current area. You probably have to pivot a little bit or maybe go to a different department.
Okay, fair enough. Well, it looks like those are actually all the questions that we had for this session, but I think we had some really great ones that have come in. So we'll go ahead and close our first session today. Thank you all for your time. And Tricia, thank you so much for hosting us. We'll make a summary and the recording available and let you all know when it's ready.
What about the next session? And I think
yes.
maybe Tricia, at the end, if you can leave us with one golden nugget, one advice which could actually impact our lives as product manager, would be great.
Sure. So you want my nugget now?
Sure.
Okay, I'll close out this, maybe a cop out. I'll close out with how I closed my PMF talk. At the end of the day, just try something new. Just do it. Don't wait for it. You're never going to have enough support, enough data, nothing. So just go for it. And then if you realize you're not making the impact that you wanted, then it's time to move on. But the first thing you should do is just try something. So
that's great, and I think it's something that's always it's a mantra. It's a good mantra to have too. And so we'll also be on the lookout also for additional PM Connect sessions in the new year. We will have some product managers from Google, Amazon, Shopify, and more, and we'll start them again starting in mid-January. And once again, thanks again so much to Tricia and to everybody for all your questions. And until we see you next time, we wish you all a happy holiday.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.